You have 72 hours to leave this property. The paper slapped against my front door hard enough to echo through the hallway. A hollow, official sound that didn't belong in a place I'd spent the last 3 years quietly fixing up, one weekend at a time. I was standing barefoot on cool hardwood, coffee still warm in my hand, when I saw it. Bold black letters, my name spelled correctly, the word eviction, sitting there like it had always owned the space more than I did. Outside, the morning air carried that faint scent of fresh asphalt from the roadwork down the block, mixed with cut grass and something sharper. Tension, maybe, or just the kind of silence that comes before people start watching. I opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking louder than usual, and there she was, Margaret Whitmore, standing on my walkway like she'd planted herself there overnight, clipboard tucked under her arm, sunglasses catching the early sun just enough to hide her eyes. She didn't smile, didn't greet me, just tilted her head slightly, like she was already bored of the outcome. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice clipped and practiced. "You've been notified multiple times." That was the first lie, but not the one that mattered. I looked past her and noticed 2 more figures lingering near the curb. HOA security, matching polos, arms folded, trying to look official without quite pulling it off. A couple of neighbors had paused their morning routines too, one pretending to check his mailbox for the 3rd time, another standing by her SUV with the door open, phone angled just enough to suggest she might be recording. Margaret stepped forward half an inch, just enough to claim the space between us. "You're in violation of community regulations," she continued, tapping the clipboard with a manicured nail. "And as of today, you are required to vacate within 72 hours. The words landed flat, rehearsed, like she'd said them before and expected them to work every time. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a slow breath, letting the smell of coffee and paper and that faint asphalt linger, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make her shift her weight. Because the truth was, none of this surprised me. Not the notice, not the timing, not even the small audience gathering at the edge of my driveway. What surprised me was how early they decided to act. "You're making a mistake," I said finally, keeping my voice even, almost casual. That earned me the smallest smirk, the kind people wear when they think they've already won. "We don't make mistakes," Margaret replied, adjusting her sunglasses. "We enforce standards." Behind her, one of the security guys cleared his throat, glancing at the paper like he was trying to memorize it, while the other shifted his stance, gravel crunching under his shoe. I noticed everything. The way Margaret held the clipboard too tightly, the way the notice had been printed on thicker paper than usual, the faint outline of an older sign down at the entrance of the neighborhood that most people stopped noticing after a while. Small things, easy to ignore, unless you knew exactly what you were looking at. 72 hours, she repeated, turning slightly so the neighbors could hear, projecting just enough authority to fill the space. After that, we proceed with removal. Removal. Not eviction, not relocation. Removal, like I was an object that had overstayed its usefulness. I nodded once, as if I understood, as if I agreed, and took another sip of coffee that had already started to cool. The liquid tasted different now, sharper somehow, like the moment had seeped into it. Margaret seemed satisfied with my silence, already pivoting slightly as if this was done, as if the outcome had been sealed the second that paper touched my door. But she didn't know what that door actually stood on, or how long I'd been waiting for someone to push this far. I reached up, peeled the notice off the wood, and held it between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, the confidence printed into every line. Margaret watched me closely for the first time, just a flicker of curiosity breaking through her routine. "Make sure you read it carefully," she said, almost as an afterthought. I met her gaze, just long enough for that flicker to turn into something else, something she couldn't quite place. "Oh, I will," I said quietly, folding the paper once, precise and deliberate. Because this wasn't the beginning of anything. It was just the moment they finally stepped onto my ground. And then the sound of metal tools clicked behind her. I did not turn around right away when I heard the metallic click behind Margaret, but I felt it, the shift in the air, the kind that happens when someone brings tools where they do not belong. And suddenly this was not just paperwork anymore. It was performance. I lowered the folded notice to my side and stepped just far enough onto the porch to see past her shoulder. One of the security guys had opened the back of their utility cart, pulling out a bright orange case with a battery-powered drill inside. The kind contractors use for quick jobs, efficient, loud, and meant to send a message before it even touches anything. The second guy glanced at me, then at Margaret, waiting for some kind of signal, like this was all part of a script they had practiced. Margaret did not look back at them. She kept her attention on me, chin slightly raised, as if she expected resistance, maybe even hoped for it. "We are authorized to secure the property if necessary," she said, her voice calm in that way that tries to sound reasonable while already assuming control. I let a few seconds pass before answering, watching the reflection of the morning light on her sunglasses, seeing my own outline there, smaller than I felt. "Secure it from what?" I asked, not challenging, just curious. That seemed to irritate her more than anything else. "From continued non-compliance," she replied, sharper this time, the rehearsed tone cracking just a little. Behind her, the drill case snapped open with a hollow plastic pop, and the sound carried across the quiet street, pulling more attention from the houses nearby. A car slowed as it passed, the driver leaning slightly to get a better look, while the woman by the SUV now fully raised her phone, no longer pretending. I noticed the details stacking up again, like they always did when things started moving too fast for most people to process. The angle of the old neighborhood sign down the block, faded lettering barely visible under years of sun, the small metal plate near the entrance that no one ever read anymore, the one Margaret had probably never even noticed. "You really think you can do this?" I asked, still keeping my voice low, almost conversational. Margaret gave a short laugh, not amused, just dismissive. "Mr. Cole, we have done this before," she said. "This community has standards, and everyone follows them." Everyone. The word hung there, heavy with assumption. I shifted my weight slightly, feeling the solid wood of the porch under my feet, the boards I had sanded and sealed myself, every inch of it familiar in a way that paperwork could never capture. The first security guy stepped closer now, drill in hand, but still not crossing the line of the walkway, like there was some invisible boundary he was not entirely sure about. "Ma'am?" he asked, glancing at Margaret for confirmation. She gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. That was the moment most people would panic, or argue, or start explaining themselves. I did none of that. Instead, I unfolded the notice again, smoothing it out with my thumb, reading the lines I already knew by heart, the official language, the references to codes and sections that sounded legitimate if you did not know where they came from, or, more importantly, where they did not. "You cited section 8.3 here," I said, tapping the paper lightly. Margaret's expression did not change, but her shoulders tightened just enough to catch. "Yes," she said. "It is clearly outlined in the HOA agreement." I nodded slowly, letting my eyes move from the paper to her, then past her, to the street, to the sign, to the edges of something bigger than this moment. "That is interesting," I said, almost to myself. The drill whirred briefly as the security guy tested it, the sound sharp and intrusive, cutting through the quiet morning like a warning that had already gone too far. Margaret took a half step closer, lowering her voice slightly, as if trying to regain control of the narrative. "You can make this easy," she said. "Pack your things, leave quietly, and we will not have to escalate." I looked at her then, really looked, past the sunglasses, past the posture, at the certainty she was holding on to like it could not be taken away. "You already escalated," I replied, folding the paper again with the same careful precision. The man with the drill shifted his grip, glancing between us, waiting for the next instruction that had not come yet. For a second, no one moved. Not Margaret, not the security, not even the neighbors, like the entire street was holding its breath without knowing why. And that was when I decided it was time to let them take one more step forward. The moment stretched just long enough for the morning to feel unnatural, like the neighborhood itself was waiting to see who would break first, and it was not going to be me. The drill in the man's hand gave off a low mechanical hum as he adjusted his grip, not using it yet, just letting the sound sit there like a threat that had not decided what it wanted to be. Margaret exhaled slowly through her nose, the kind of controlled patience that only shows up when someone is used to being obeyed without question. "Go ahead," she said without turning, her voice directed at the man behind her, but her attention still locked on me, watching for any sign that I would finally react the way she expected. The man hesitated for half a second, then stepped onto the walkway, his shoes pressing into the gravel with a crunch that sounded louder than it should have. I noticed how he paused again right at the edge of my porch, like something about crossing that last few feet did not feel as simple as the clipboard made it seem. "You are sure?" he asked, quieter now, not to me, but to her. Margaret did not hesitate. "We have authority," she said, sharper this time, like she needed the words to land harder now that doubt had entered the air. Authority. I let that word settle in my mind for a second, turning it over like a coin I had seen before, worn down from too many people using it without understanding where it actually came from. I took one step back, not retreating, just creating space, enough for him to think he had been given permission to continue. The wooden boards under my feet creaked softly, familiar and steady, while the sunlight shifted just enough to catch the edge of the folded paper still in my hand. The man lifted the drill slightly, then lowered it again, glancing at Margaret one more time. That was when I spoke, not louder, not aggressive, just clear enough to cut through the moment. "Before you touch anything," I said, "you might want to check something." Margaret's jaw tightened just slightly, the first real crack in her composure. "There is nothing to check," she replied quickly, too quickly. "Everything has been reviewed." I tilted my head a little, as if considering that, then looked past her. Again, toward the entrance of the neighborhood, where the old sign leaned just a few degrees off center, its paint faded, its lettering barely legible unless you knew what it used to say. "That sign," I said, nodding in its direction. "When was the last time anyone looked at it?" The question landed oddly, not fitting into the script she had prepared. Margaret frowned, just for a second. "That is irrelevant," she said, dismissing it with a small wave of her hand. But the man with the drill followed my gaze anyway, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to see what I was pointing at. The woman with the phone shifted her position to get a better angle, her curiosity now stronger than her need to stay unnoticed. I unfolded the paper again, slower this time, letting the edges straighten out completely, and ran my finger along the line she had cited earlier. Section 8.3 only applies under a registered governing body, I said, not looking at her, just reading it out like it was any other line on a page. Margaret stepped forward now, closing the distance by another inch, her voice dropping lower. "Mr. Cole, this is your final notice," she said. "Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Everything about this had been predictable so far, except for one thing, and that was the part she had never bothered to verify. The man with the drill shifted again, his confidence slipping just enough to make the tool in his hand feel heavier. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "maybe we should." He did not finish the sentence. Margaret cut him off with a look, sharp and immediate, the kind that shuts people down before they can form a complete thought. "Proceed," she said. The word hung there, firm, final, and just a little too loud for someone who was completely certain. I folded the notice once more, this time smaller, more deliberate, and slipped it into my pocket like it had already served its purpose. Then I stepped aside from the doorway entirely, giving them a clear path, removing the last visible obstacle in front of them. That was the part that confused them the most. I could see it in the way both men hesitated, in the way Margaret's eyes narrowed behind the tinted lenses. Because people who are about to lose everything do not usually step aside. They argue, they beg, they stall. They do not make it easier. I rested my hand lightly against the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood under my fingers, grounding myself in something real while they tried to decide what my silence meant. "Go ahead," I said quietly, mirroring her words from a moment ago, letting them sit in the space between us. The man with the drill took one more step forward, finally committing, his foot crossing onto the porch as the low hum of the tool rose again, sharper now, closer. Margaret straightened slightly, her confidence returning in small increments, reinforced by movement, by action, by the illusion that everything was still under control. But control has a way of shifting when you step into the wrong place without realizing it. And just as the drill lifted toward the door, something down the street caught their attention. The sound came first, low and distant, like tires rolling slower than they should on a street this quiet, and it pulled every eye away from my front door at the exact same time. The drill stopped mid-whir, the man holding it freezing as if someone had pressed pause on him, while Margaret turned just enough to follow the shift in attention without fully giving up her position. A dark sedan was easing its way down the block, not fast, not hesitant, just deliberate, the kind of movement that does not belong to someone lost or passing through. The sunlight caught the windshield at an angle that hid whoever was inside, but the way the car slowed near the entrance sign, almost like it was checking something, made the air tighten again in a different way. I did not move. I did not need to. I had already seen that car before. The neighbors felt it too, even if they did not understand it, their curiosity bending toward the street now instead of me. Conversations starting in low murmurs, phones angling for a better view. Margaret straightened slightly, recovering her posture, trying to pull the moment back under her control. "Do not stop," she said to the man with the drill, her voice firm again. But there was a slight delay this time, just enough to show that something had interrupted her rhythm. The man hesitated, then looked back at the door, then at her, caught between instruction and instinct. "It is probably nothing," she added quickly, more to herself than anyone else. But nothing does not usually arrive that slowly. The sedan came to a smooth stop about 3 houses down, engine still running, and for a second, no one stepped out. That was the part that shifted everything. The waiting, the quiet pause that did not match the rest of the morning. The drill lowered a few inches, not by command, but by uncertainty, and the man holding it adjusted his stance again, his earlier confidence now replaced with something quieter, more cautious. Margaret noticed it too, and that seemed to irritate her more than the car itself. "Proceed," she repeated, sharper now, trying to force the moment back into place. The man nodded, almost reflexively, and raised the drill again, the sound returning, louder this time against the stillness of the street. I watched him carefully, not the tool, not the door, but the way his eyes kept flicking back toward the sedan, like part of him already knew he was stepping into something he did not fully understand. I shifted my hand slightly along the door frame, feeling the edge where the wood met the metal hinge, a small detail I had noticed the first week I moved in, the way everything here had been built to look permanent, even when it was not. The car door finally opened with a soft click that carried farther than it should have, and the sound cut through the drill's hum just enough to make it falter again. A man stepped out, dressed simply, nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention at first glance. But there was something in the way he closed the door, in the way he looked up at the street before taking a single step forward, that made people straighten without realizing it. He did not rush. He did not call out. He just started walking, measured and steady, his gaze moving from the sign at the entrance, to the houses, to the small gathering forming around my driveway. Margaret turned fully now, finally giving the street her complete attention, and I saw it then, just for a fraction of a second, the smallest flicker of hesitation before she covered it again with that same practiced confidence. "This does not concern you," she said loudly, projecting her voice outward now, as if claiming the entire street as her domain. The man did not respond. He kept walking, closing the distance step by step, his shoes making a soft, even sound against the pavement, unhurried, unaffected by the tension that had built itself around him. The neighbors shifted again, some stepping back slightly, others leaning in closer, drawn to the moment without understanding why. The drill went silent once more, the man holding it lowering it completely this time, his attention fully pulled away despite Margaret's earlier command. I stayed where I was, just inside the doorway, watching everything align exactly the way it was supposed to, every piece moving into place without me needing to say another word. Margaret took a step forward, positioning herself at the edge of my porch like she was about to intercept him, to reassert whatever authority she still believed she had. "I said this is a private matter," she called out, her voice firm but no longer effortless. The man stopped a few feet away from the walkway, his eyes moving briefly from her to me, then back again, taking in the scene in a single glance that seemed to register more than most people would in minutes. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask a question. He simply looked at Margaret, then at the paper in her hand, then at the drill, and something in his expression shifted just enough to make her pause. For the first time since this started, Margaret did not speak immediately. And in that silence, the balance began to tilt. The man reached into his jacket slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, and pulled out a thin folder, holding it at his side as he took one final step closer to the walkway. Then he looked directly at me and gave the smallest nod, like we had already said everything that needed to be said. And Margaret finally realized she was not the one in control of this moment anymore. Margaret's silence did not last long, but it lasted long enough for everyone to notice it, and that was all it took for the shift to become real. She adjusted her grip on the clipboard, straightening it against her side like it could steady something that had already started to slip. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone sharp again. But now there was an edge to it, something less certain, like she was testing the ground before stepping forward. The man did not answer right away. He glanced once more at the entrance sign down the street, then back at her, then finally opened the folder in his hand with a quiet, deliberate motion that felt louder than the drill had just moments ago. Papers inside caught the light, crisp, official, the kind that do not need bold fonts or raised voices to carry weight. "Actually," he said calmly, his voice even and measured, "I believe I am here to help clarify something." That word hung differently than Margaret's earlier ones. Clarify. Not enforce, not remove, not proceed. Clarify. Margaret took a half step forward, reclaiming her stance at the edge of the porch, placing herself between him and the rest of the scene like she could still control the flow of it. "This is a private enforcement matter," she said. "If you are not a resident, you need to leave." The man gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, like he had heard this kind of statement many times before. "I understand your position," he replied, his tone unchanged, "but I would suggest we take a closer look at the authority being exercised here." The man with the drill lowered it completely now, his attention fully shifted, the tool hanging loosely in his hand like it no longer belonged in this moment. The second security guard stepped back slightly, creating space without realizing he was doing it. The neighbors leaned in further, drawn by the calm in the man's voice more than anything else. I stayed where I was, just inside the doorway, watching Margaret carefully, because this was the point where confidence either doubled down or cracked open. She chose to push forward. "Our authority is clearly defined under the Homeowners Association Agreement," she said, lifting the clipboard slightly, as if it could prove her point on its own. The man glanced at it briefly, then back at her, and shook his head once, slow and precise. "That agreement," he said, tapping the edge of his folder lightly, "is only valid if it is properly registered and recognized under county records." The word county landed harder than anything else so far, grounding the conversation in something beyond neighborhood rules and personal interpretation. Margaret's expression tightened again, the small muscles around her mouth pulling just enough to show strain. "It is registered," she said quickly. "It has been in effect for years." The man's eyes did not leave her. "Then it will be very easy to confirm," he replied. He flipped one page in the folder, then another, each movement unhurried, controlled, like he was giving her time to reconsider before he said anything further. The sound of paper sliding against paper was soft, but in the quiet street, it carried. I could see Margaret's fingers press more firmly against the clipboard now, her knuckles paling slightly under the pressure. "We have followed all procedures," she added, her voice lifting just a fraction, enough to reach the neighbors again, like she needed their presence to reinforce her claim. The man stopped turning pages and looked up at her again, his expression calm, but now there was something else behind it, something that had been building since he stepped out of the car. "Then you will not mind if we verify that together," he said. Together, not against her, not in opposition, but also not under her control. The distinction was subtle, but it shifted the ground beneath her feet. The man with the drill glanced at Margaret again, waiting for direction, but she did not respond immediately this time. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the entrance sign, then back to the folder in the man's hand, then to me, standing quietly in the doorway, still not interfering, still not reacting the way she expected. That was the part she could not reconcile. Because if she was right, I should have been panicking by now. If she was in control, this moment should have already been over. "Who are you?" she asked finally, the question coming out sharper than she intended. The man closed the folder halfway, not fully, just enough to hold his place. "Someone who reviews property records," he said simply. He did not give a title, did not add detail, but the way he said it carried more weight than a long explanation would have. The neighbors shifted again, whispers starting to build at the edges of the scene, words like records and county passing between them in low tones. Margaret's posture changed almost imperceptibly, her shoulders pulling back, her stance adjusting like she was trying to re-establish footing that no longer felt solid. "There is nothing to review," she insisted, but the confidence in her voice no longer matched the certainty in her eyes. The man gave a small, almost sympathetic nod, then opened the folder again, this time turning it slightly so the first page faced outward, just enough for her to see the heading at the top. He did not push it toward her. He did not step closer. He simply held it there, letting the information exist in the space between them. Margaret's gaze dropped to the page, and for the first time since this began, she did not speak immediately. The street stayed quiet, the drill silent, the neighbors still, as the moment stretched again, but this time it was not waiting for action. It was waiting for recognition. And Margaret had just started to read the wrong line. Margaret's eyes moved across the page slower than they should have, like her mind was trying to keep up with something it did not expect to see. And the longer she looked, the quieter the street became. I could hear the faint ticking of the sedan's engine cooling, the distant hum of traffic beyond the neighborhood, even the soft rustle of leaves shifting in a light breeze. All the small sounds that usually disappear under conversation, but now filled the space she had stopped controlling. The man holding the folder did not rush her, did not explain, did not interrupt. He simply held the page steady, letting her read exactly what she had never thought to check. The security guard with the drill lowered it fully to his side, the tool now completely silent, his posture no longer assertive, just uncertain, like he had stepped into a job that no longer matched the situation in front of him. "This is not correct," Margaret said finally, but the words came out uneven, her voice missing the clean edge it had carried all morning. The man tilted his head slightly, not dismissive, not confrontational, just patient. "It is directly from the county registry," he replied. "Recorded and filed." The word filed seemed to land hardest, grounding everything in a place that her clipboard could not reach. Margaret flipped her gaze back to the top of the page, then down again, scanning faster now, like if she moved quickly enough, the meaning might change. "There must be an error," she said, firmer this time, but the firmness sounded practiced rather than certain. I watched her carefully, noticing how her fingers tightened against the edge of the clipboard, how her shoulders had shifted from squared control to something slightly guarded, like she was bracing against a realization she did not want to accept. The neighbors had gone completely still now, their earlier curiosity replaced by something quieter, something closer to attention, like they understood that whatever was happening had moved beyond routine enforcement. The man in front of her turned another page in the folder, just one, revealing a map this time, lines and boundaries drawn with precise clarity, each lot marked, each section labeled in a way that left very little room for interpretation. "The original parcel designation is here," he said, tapping lightly near the center of the page. "Everything else extends from this." Margaret followed his finger, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to orient herself, to place what she was seeing within the version of the neighborhood she believed in. "That does not change the association's authority," she said. But now there was hesitation between each word, small pauses that had not been there before. The man did not respond immediately. He let the silence sit again, just long enough for the difference between certainty and repetition to become obvious. "It does, if the association was never formally granted governance over the original parcel," he said calmly. That sentence settled over the scene in a way nothing else had. Not loud, not dramatic, just final in its logic. Margaret's head lifted slightly, her gaze snapping from the page back to him, searching his expression for any sign that this was exaggeration, misinterpretation, something she could push back against. She did not find it. "That is not possible," she said, but now it sounded less like a statement and more like a hope. The man's expression remained unchanged. "It is uncommon," he said, "but it is documented." The second security guard shifted his weight again, stepping another inch back without realizing it, creating more distance between himself and the porch, as if space itself might separate him from whatever this was becoming. The woman with the phone lowered it slightly, her focus no longer on capturing a spectacle, but on understanding what she was witnessing. I remained still, my hand resting against the door frame, feeling the steady texture of the wood under my fingers, grounding myself in the part of this that had always been real. Margaret looked back down at the map, her eyes moving more carefully now, tracing lines instead of scanning them, following boundaries instead of assuming them. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice quieter, the question coming from a different place than before. The man closed the folder halfway again, holding his place with one hand. "The county clerk's office," he said. "Public record. Public." The word echoed differently than her earlier claims of private enforcement, opening the situation beyond her control, beyond the neighborhood, beyond the structure she had relied on. Margaret's gaze shifted once more, this time toward me, just for a moment, and in that glance, I could see it, the first real recognition that something about me did not match the role she had assigned. Not fear, not defiance, just stillness, the kind that comes from knowing how this ends long before anyone else does. She looked back at the man, then at the folder, then at the drill still hanging uselessly at her side. "Even if that were true," she said, trying to rebuild her footing, "this property is still subject to community standards." The man gave a small nod, acknowledging the attempt, then opened the folder fully again, turning it just enough to reveal another section she had not yet seen. "Only if the governing body has legal standing over it," he replied. The sentence did not rise in volume, did not carry any force beyond its clarity, but it shifted the weight of the entire moment. Margaret's lips parted slightly, like she was about to respond, but no words came out right away. The street remained still, every detail suspended, waiting for her to either reclaim control or let it go. And for the first time, she did not know which one she could do. Margaret's silence stretched longer this time, not because she was choosing her words carefully, but because she was running out of the ones that used to work. The folder in the man's hand remained open between them, steady and unshaken, like the information inside it did not need to be defended. I watched her posture shift again, subtle but undeniable, her shoulders no longer squared toward control but angled slightly inward, like she was trying to contain something that had already started to unravel. "This does not override established community governance," she said finally, but the sentence came out slower, each word placed more carefully, as if precision could replace certainty. The man nodded once, acknowledging the structure of her argument without accepting it. "It would," he said, "if the community governance was never legally attached to the originating parcel." He did not raise his voice, did not emphasize any particular word, but the sentence landed with a quiet finality that settled deeper than anything said before. Margaret's eyes moved back to the map again, tracing the central boundary line that had been pointed out to her, and this time she did not look confused. She looked like she was starting to understand, and that was worse. The security guard holding the drill shifted again, this time stepping fully off the porch without being told, the gravel crunching under his shoe as he created distance between himself and the doorway. The other guard followed a second later, both of them now positioned closer to the curb than the house, their earlier presence dissolving into something more like bystanders. The neighbors noticed it too, the way authority was physically retreating before anyone officially said it was over. Margaret inhaled slowly, then exhaled, her grip on the clipboard loosening just enough for the edge of the paper inside to shift. "Even if there was an oversight in the original filing," she said, trying again, "the association has been operating here for years." The man closed the folder slightly, not fully, just enough to mark the page, then looked at her with the same steady expression. "Duration does not create authority," he replied. "Documentation does." That sentence changed something in the air, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Margaret's eyes flicked toward the neighbors, then back to the man, then briefly toward me again, and I saw it clearly now. The moment where she realized this was no longer a situation she could control in front of an audience. Because it was not just about me anymore. It was about everything she had claimed to manage. "You are saying the association has no standing?" she asked, her voice lower now, the question coming from a place she had not shown before. The man considered her for a second, then gave a small, measured nod. "Over this parcel," he said. "Yes." The distinction was precise, careful, but it carried enough weight to shift the entire structure she had been standing on. The neighbors began to murmur again, but this time it was different, not curiosity, not speculation, but realization spreading in quiet waves. The woman with the phone lowered it completely now, her attention no longer divided between watching and recording. Margaret straightened again, But it was not the same posture as before. It was not control. It was defense. "That does not make him exempt from community rules," she said, gesturing slightly toward me without fully turning. The man followed her gesture, his gaze landing on me for a brief moment before returning to her. "It does," he said calmly, "if the rules were never enforceable against the property to begin with." The clarity of it left very little room to maneuver. Margaret opened her mouth as if to respond, then stopped, her expression tightening again, but this time it was not frustration. It was calculation, like she was trying to find a path forward that no longer existed. I stayed where I was, still, quiet, letting the moment unfold exactly the way it needed to, because this was the part where speaking would only interrupt what she was finally seeing on her own. The man in front of her adjusted the folder slightly, then turned one more page, revealing a document stamped with a seal that caught the light just enough to draw her attention immediately. "This was filed prior to any association formation," he said. "It establishes ownership and jurisdiction." Ownership. The word settled heavier than anything else so far, anchoring the entire conversation in a way that could not be redirected. Margaret's eyes locked onto the seal, then moved slowly across the page, her breathing shallow now, controlled, but no longer steady. The street remained quiet, every small sound amplified by the absence of her earlier authority. She looked up at him again, and for the first time, there was no attempt to correct him, no immediate response, no assertion of control. There was only the recognition that something fundamental had shifted and that she had not seen it coming. Her gaze moved once more, slower this time, until it settled on me, standing just inside the doorway, exactly where I had been since the beginning. And this time, when she looked at me, she was not seeing a violation. She was starting to see a boundary she had already crossed. Margaret did not move right away, but everything about her had already shifted, the way she stood, the way she held the clipboard, even the way she looked at the paper in front of her like it no longer belonged to the same reality she had been operating in just minutes ago. The man with the folder did not press further, did not repeat himself. He simply let the silence expand, giving her space to either step back or push forward, and for the first time, she hesitated long enough that the choice itself became visible. The neighbors were no longer pretending to be busy now. They stood openly watching, the quiet hum of whispers moving through them like a slow ripple, words like ownership and records drifting between them, reshaping what they thought they knew about this place. The security guards had fully disengaged at this point, both of them standing near the curb, the drill hanging uselessly at one side, no longer a tool of authority, just an object that had arrived too early for the truth. I stayed in the doorway, still, grounded, feeling the edge of the frame under my fingers, the same place I had been when this started, the same place I had chosen not to leave, not because I could not, but because I did not need to. Margaret finally lowered the clipboard slightly, her grip loosening as she exhaled, a controlled breath that tried to regain composure but carried the weight of realization instead. "If this is accurate," she said slowly, choosing each word like it might shift the outcome, "then this property would not fall under our jurisdiction." The sentence sounded unfamiliar coming from her, like she was speaking a language she had never expected to use. The man gave a small nod, not triumphant, not corrective, just confirming what was already there. "That is correct," he said. No emphasis, no pause, just clarity. Margaret looked back down at the folder again, then at the street, then at the neighbors, and for a brief second, she seemed to understand exactly how many people had just heard that. That was when the real shift happened, not in the documents, not in the law, but in the perception, the moment where authority stopped being assumed and started being questioned. She straightened again, but this time it was different, not the rigid posture of control, but something more measured, more careful, like she was recalibrating in real time. "Then this situation requires further review," she said, her voice steadier now, but no longer commanding. The man closed the folder fully this time, the soft sound of it clicking shut marking the end of something that had already been decided. "That would be advisable," he replied. There was no resistance in his tone, no push to escalate, just agreement, but the kind that comes after the conclusion has already been reached. Margaret nodded once, small and contained, then turned slightly toward the security guards, who immediately straightened, as if waiting for direction they had not been given in a while. "Stand down," she said, and the words felt different from her earlier commands, quieter, but heavier, like they carried consequence instead of assumption. The man with the drill did not hesitate this time. He stepped back fully, closing the case without a word, the sharp click of plastic sealing it shut echoing faintly in the now settled street. The other guard followed, both of them moving away from the porch, away from the door, away from a line they had nearly crossed without understanding it. Margaret turned back toward me then, and this time, when she looked at me, there was no dismissal, no superiority, just a careful, measured awareness of who I might actually be in this situation. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice more controlled than before, "we will need to verify these records before proceeding any further." I nodded once, not agreeing, not conceding, just acknowledging the words as they existed. "Of course," I said quietly. The air felt different now, lighter in some ways, but also sharper, like everything had come into focus all at once. The neighbors began to shift again, some stepping back toward their homes, others lingering just long enough to confirm that what they had seen was real. The woman with the phone finally lowered it completely, slipping it into her pocket as if the moment no longer needed to be captured to be believed. Margaret adjusted the clipboard again, but this time she did not raise it, did not reference it. She simply held it at her side, like it had lost its authority along with everything else. The man who had arrived stood quietly, his presence no longer an interruption, but a confirmation of something that had already been set in motion long before today. I stepped forward slightly now, just one step, enough to stand fully in the doorway, the threshold between inside and outside, between what they thought this place was and what it actually had always been. Margaret noticed it, her eyes following the movement, her expression tightening just enough to show that she understood the significance of that small shift. Because stepping forward now was not resistance. It was ownership, and that was the part she could not undo. She held my gaze for a second longer, then looked away first, turning slightly toward the street, toward the car, toward everything that had just changed without her permission. The morning had returned to its normal sounds, but nothing about it felt the same anymore. And as she took a small step back from the porch, I realized she was already trying to figure out how far this would go. Margaret stepped off the porch slowly, not in retreat, but in recognition, each movement measured like she was recalculating her place in a space she thought she controlled just minutes ago, and the distance between her and my front door suddenly felt larger than the few feet it actually was. The security guards were already moving toward their vehicle, the drill case sealed, their presence reduced to nothing more than a quiet exit, like they had never been part of something that was now clearly beyond them. The neighbors lingered just long enough to confirm what they had witnessed, their conversations low but certain now, no longer questioning whether something was wrong, but understanding exactly what had been. The man with the folder remained where he was for a moment, watching Margaret, not with confrontation, not with victory, but with the calm patience of someone who had seen this realization happen before. Margaret adjusted her grip on the clipboard again, but this time she did not look at it, did not rely on it. She simply held it like an object that had lost its authority along with everything else she had brought with her. "We will be in contact," she said finally, her voice controlled, but no longer commanding, the words placed carefully, like she was choosing a path that allowed her to leave without fully acknowledging what had just happened. I nodded once, steady, not agreeing, not dismissing, just letting the moment exist as it was. "I am sure you will," I replied. The man beside her gave a small glance toward me, then closed the distance by a single step, his voice low enough that it did not carry to the street, but clear enough that it did not need to. "You handled that exactly right," he said. I did not respond immediately, just let the words settle, because this had never been about handling anything in the moment. It had been about understanding it long before it started. Margaret turned toward the sedan then, her posture straight again, but different now, less rigid, more aware, like she was already thinking ahead to what this would mean once it reached beyond this street. The car door opened for her this time, and she paused for just a second before getting in, her gaze shifting once more toward the entrance sign, the same one she had ignored for years, the same one that now held more weight than anything on her clipboard ever had. The engine started again, smoother this time, and the car pulled away without urgency, without hesitation, Just a quiet departure that left the street exactly as it had been, except for what everyone now knew. The man with the folder turned to leave as well, but before he did, he looked back at me one last time, a small nod passing between us. Not agreement, not acknowledgement, just confirmation that everything that needed to be seen had been seen. Then he walked back toward the sedan, his steps as steady as when he arrived, his presence fading into the background of a morning that had already changed. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the quiet return, the familiar weight of the doorway, the stillness of the house behind me, untouched, unchanged, exactly as it had always been. The notice in my pocket felt lighter now, not because it had lost its paper or its ink, but because it had lost its meaning. I reached in, pulled it out, and looked at it one last time, the bold letters no longer carrying any weight. Just a reminder of how easily authority can be assumed when no one checks where it actually comes from. Down the street, the entrance sign caught the light again, its faded surface revealing just enough of its original lettering to make sense if you knew what to look for. The boundary it marked, the line that had always existed whether anyone respected it or not. I folded the notice once more, smaller this time, then stepped back inside, the door closing with a soft, familiar click that sounded exactly the same as it always had, except now it meant something different. Because nothing about this place had changed. Only the truth had been seen. And somewhere beyond the end of the street, someone was already realizing what that would cost them.